Welcome everybody to the third episode of Unfamiliar Territory. I'm joined by my co-host, Kalikaiz.
Hello everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about how to sideboard against the top 10 meta decks at the moment, and what the game plan is against those decks. This week we're going to be using Kalikaiz's most recent 5.0 list that he's been having some amount of success with, and let's get straight into it.
Hey everyone. So in the last couple weeks we've been experiencing a bit of a mid-range format, and we'll see that as we get into the meta of the Pauper leagues and Pauper in general. And as a result of that, what I've been doing is trying to lean into as much value as possible. So my current list that you're going to see on the screen, I'm trying to jam in Ephemerate, Mnemonic Wall to rebuy a lot of instants of sorceries. I'm also using bounce lands. And then I have 4 Deep Analysis and 4 Seagate Oracle to try to get as many card draw as possible. I'm also using 4 snaps here. That combined with the Godfaros Faithful is pretty much my anti-aggro plan main, and can work out pretty well because you can use the combos that we were talking about in the last episode, where you can perhaps Ghostly Flicker, 2 Mnemonic Walls to get infinite snaps, or do some shenanigans with Chancery and Sanctuary and a Familiar and a Wall to get infinite snaps that way to kind of stop aggro. But we're seeing a lot of not specifically aggro decks in the top, and we'll go ahead and get into that there. So for our first main deck that we're kind of targeting here is Izzet Fae or Izzet Delver, and here we're looking at the last 14 days on Magic Online for MTG Goldfish. That's the top meta deck right now. Here I'm pretty much already post board for them. So in this matchup, what I'm trying to do is land an early Godfaros Faithful, which will allow us to gain enough life to get out of range of their onesie twosie attacks with their Fae. And it also is a really good wall against their ninja attacks. So basically my game plan is to stick an early Godfaros Faithful and continue to gain life while disrupting them with a couple of counterspells, and really just try to play around Spellsetter Sprite as much as possible. You'll notice that these players usually are holding up 2 mana or holding up 4 mana, and you'll say, okay, they most likely have a Sprite because they haven't played one yet, and they probably have a counterspell, so how do I play around that? A lot of the times I'll, on turn 3, lead with the Godfaros Faithful while holding a Prohibit, and if they have 2 mana open, they almost always will go for the Spellsetter Sprite, really because they need to get value out of that, and they need to get an unblockable dude in to try to get their ninja hit in. So it's relatively predictable, in my opinion. Recently we've been seeing Fae decks use a lot of accumulated knowledge, which can be a bit more of an issue for us because they have a lot more card advantage when they start to get that engine online, especially if they can maybe Mystic Sanctuary back their 3rd or 4th accumulated knowledge. So post board, in the sideboard we're looking at perhaps the Exclude as a value counterspell for their Spellsetter Sprite, and then definitely some of the negates. I'm always going to be boarding out Sage of Denizen, because in this specific matchup we don't need to attack to win. We just need to gain life and outvalue them and then start attacking. They're not going to be gaining any life at all. I will also board out some number of Snaps and Seagate Oracles if we have no Delvers from their side. So for example, in the Izzet Fae list, we would probably board out 1 Sage Row, 1 Seagate Oracle, and then 1 Snap in this specific list, and bring in 3 negates. You could potentially take out another Snap for an Exclude if you're, let's say, I would think if you're on the play, I would bring in the Exclude, and then if you're on the draw, I would probably keep in the Snap just because we want to stay lower to the ground on the draw.
What are your thoughts on bringing in Blue Elemental Blast against them?
Have you ever brought in Blue Elemental Blast against Fae?
No, I'm just wondering if you do, since they have Red Elemental Blast and Scred and such.
Yeah. What I found is that you really don't want to be stuck in your hand with a counterspell that can't hit a target. So I almost never bring in the blast specifically to counter one of their blasts or their removal spells. Additionally, it's almost always good for you if they're trying to 1-for-1 you. So especially because we have the deep analysis. So like, if it's turn 2 and they tap out, I'll a lot of the times just jam a Sunscape Familiar if I don't have anything else to do, because on their turn it's going to force them to deal with it. Like they'll have to go and fetch and then get a Bolt online or get a Scred online to make sure that they take it out. And then my next turn I can land a Seagate Oracle and then I can start getting value and kind of accumulate it there. So you kind of have to pick your battles. I wouldn't bring in Blue Elemental Blast just for their removal spells.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, since the game goes on, we can use Mortuary Mire and Mystic Sanctuary as a combo. You'll find a lot of games where they keep removing your creatures, but you can force them to tap low or hold a bunch of counters in your hand such that on their end step you can flicker Mortuary Mire and Mystic Sanctuary, and you can get back you can like flicker Mire and Sanctuary as long as there's 3 other islands, and then click the Mortuary Mire trigger targeting Drifter first, and then Mystic Sanctuary targeting Flicker, so that on your turn you draw the ghost, or you draw your Mole Drifter, and then you'll evoke it, and then flicker it and the Mystic Sanctuary, and you're still up some cards. And they're out whatever removal spell they used on it. So in this list specifically too, we've got Ephemerate, and if you can kind of tap them low or work a specific time to Ephemerate a Mole Drifter, you're just drawing 4 to 6 cards and you're way, 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 way ahead, especially with the blocker for most of their guys.
Yeah, that's usually my game plan against Blue-Red Fairies. You want to get down Ephemerate Mole Drifter whenever you get the chance to, because it usually closes out the game because they have so much 1-for-1 removal.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll sometimes see Blue-Red Fae bring in a Relic or 2. It's generally not that good against you because the Relic can be played around and we're drawing a lot of cards, especially since they're removing your dudes, or you have like cycle lands or the fetch lands. You can kind of stock up the graveyard so it doesn't matter that much, and then force them to crack it by either playing a wall or playing a sanctuary, and then losing something but not a lot. If they do have a Relic, you have to be a little bit concerned about when you do or do not play Deep Analysis, because if you play a Deep Analysis on 4, it gets countered and then they crack the Relic. It's very bad for you. No, I was just going to say that's something that I've gotten bit by a couple of times, and I definitely in the finals of the season 1 for the Mox Championship, I was super behind, and CCO Geyer, he landed a Relic early and forced me to play out my Deep Analysis, and then he just ate them, which put me way behind.
Yeah, I usually find Relic and Inhale Spell Bomb and those kinds of cards more annoyances than actually good against familiars. But that's from my experience. Usually, I've probably gotten bitten from it a couple of times. Probably lost a couple games from it. But most of the time, it's not that great. You could just ephemerate a wall or something to get back your flicker in response to the Relic crack.
Yeah,
so
you can do tricky things like like you said, you hold your ephemerate in your hand, you play the wall targeting something, they crack it, you ephemerate the wall and get it back, get them both back anyway. Or you can do something like play the Mystic Sanctuary, your second Mystic Sanctuary, targeting something, and then they crack the Relic and you flicker both the Mystic Sanctuaries to get everything you wanted back. So most of the time you can play around it if you're playing smart.
Yeah. You don't want to jam stuff straight into Relic, because that's how they get you. You want to be patient against Relic. And I think go off right when you have, like, let's say another Flicker or another Ephemerate in hand. That's when you want to go for the combo and kind of blow them out.
Yeah, because in this matchup you have such a high advantage in the late game, I really don't press against my opponent that much, and I let them make the mistake. You have to try to make all your land drops and get ahead there as well. So the Chanceries make a big difference in that matchup. So like you'll be doing land drop every turn, bounce land drop again, while they're like cantripping, looking for a land drop, maybe countering something that doesn't matter. Really try to play on their end step if you possibly can, to force their hand and tap them low before your turn, and then wait for a big turn and start doing things. Sometimes I even like don't really do that much until turn 6, and then I play a deep analysis and flash it back to draw 4 cards, and they can't really come back from that. Okay, so moving on to Tron. Tron in the past has been the mortal enemy of familiars, mostly based on the card Dinrova Horror and the fact that Dinrova Horror can bounce your lands. So previously, when you were using a lot of bounce lands, up to 6 in a specific list, your tempo would be completely blown away by a Dinrova Horror. So in this list, we're using a lot fewer bounce lands, but when you're facing Tron, you have to be very careful if and when to play them out at all. So in this matchup, it's very important to get your basics out early so that you can use them. Game 1, looking at this list from Hellsaw in the challenge, you can kind of just try to turbo and win as fast as possible. They don't generally have a lot of counterspells. This one does have 5, so that's a problem. But you basically want to pay attention to how much mana they have and how much colored mana they have, and think about how many spells that they can cast in a turn. So let's say they have like a cave and 2 prisms. They're only going to be able to do 3 things. But if they have a cave and 2 prisms and they don't have Tron but they have 4 lands, they're probably only going to be doing 2 things in response to what you're doing. So you just kind of try to like sneak in some value over and over while getting to the point where either your Mystic Sanctuaries are online or your Mnemonic Wall is going to be online, and then kind of try to sneak in the combo while holding up some counter magic for game 1. For game 2, we're going to be taking out all of the God-Pharaoh's Faithful and 1 Snap, and bringing in 3 Negates and 2 Remove Souls. Potentially bringing out a second Snap for an Exclude if you feel that they will not have a Crusher. So I would probably do that on the play but not the draw, because Crusher's really going to take a number on you. If they land it, you're going to not have a good time. I like to have snaps in the deck just really because a lot of people try to punk you out with Crusher. Sometimes, like in my old lists where I had 4 Faithfuls and 3 Strands, I would actually bring in 2 Remove Souls, 2 Negates, 2 Dispels, and 1 Blue Elemental Blast there. But the Blue Elemental Blast, I wouldn't want to have more than a single. You'll generally be able to hit a Reb with it, but it's very sketchy.
Yeah, it only hits Reb, so...
Yeah. Usually what happens in this matchup is, well, post-board, is that both players are trying to hold up mana while developing their, like, as much as possible. And then you'll get to a point where you just have a big counter war and whoever wins gets to win the game. Sometimes they will go for, like, a flicker on their prisms or something, and you can negate that. You basically want to just post-board lean on all your counters, and if you have more than 1 counter in hand, try to counter anything that'll let them get into Tron. So let's say I'm on the play. If I have a negate in hand and on their turn 2 they play like a map or a prism, I will just immediately counter it, especially map. But if they play a prism, I'll counter it right away, because it's going to get them they're just going to cycle, draw them closer to Tron, and get them a colored source. So I'm just trying to, so in the beginning of the game, I guess I'm trying to pinch them on their Tron's lands or on their colored sources, just based on whichever they have fewer of. So just try to like not let them do their thing, essentially. You could even take out a Seagate Oracle here for another counterspell. So like I guess in this specific list, you could take out 4 Faithfuls, 1 Snap, 1 Seagate Oracle, and then bring in Exclude, 2 Remove Souls, and 3 Negates. That would probably work pretty well, because the Deep Analysis can draw more cards than the Seagate Oracle.
So I've seen some lists playing Removal Tron again, like Blue Red Tron, with Flame Slashes, since with Bonner's ornament, it's much better there. So, is there any chance that you will start bringing in Blue Elemental Blast against Tron with more Flame Slashes and bolts?
That's a good plan, probably, I think, because their counter to you is going to be mostly Rebs or like Pyros and those removal spells, and those are red removal spells. So I think some Blue Elemental Blast coming in would be good. You probably want to just use as low to the ground counters as possible. So maybe like in this list, you could remove 4 Faithfuls, a Sagero, not the Sagero, sorry, 4 Faithfuls, a Seagate, a Snap, and bring in 3 Negates, 2 Remove Souls, and a Blue Blast. Or maybe just take out 2 Snaps for another Blue Blast. Just being aware that you really don't want to get hit with the Crusher.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's a good point. I think that Removal Tron is probably a lot worse for us than the standard Fogtron because they're going to be interacting with us way more. And in the Fogtron matchup, they basically don't have removal. They're just using the Fogs to stop all creature decks. So we are totally free to just throw Sunscape Familiar on the board turn 2. But if they're playing all these Flame Slashes, now I have to worry about way too many things at once. So I'm considering like maybe cutting a Snap in the main for a Negate or something and getting rid of the counterspell. So maybe like 2 Prohibit, 2 Negate. If they're going to be leaning really hard on the Bonder's Ornament, then we probably want to just have the option to snipe it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think
totally
the new Tronlets are going to be much harder against us. They don't play Dinrova, but they have almost no dead cards against us. Yeah. So it might be much more difficult to battle. But it might still be a close matchup, who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. I'm also concerned about the number of bounce lands against those decks. I know that they might not be playing Dinrova Horror, but maybe they are. I don't really know exactly what their plan is going to be moving forward.
Yeah.
As of this recording, it's the first time that we had the Bonder's Ornament in a challenge, and so we'll have to see how it kind of settles out. If it's literally just Blue-Red Tron and they're not playing Dinrovas, then I would probably keep the bounce lands because of the acceleration that you're going to get from them and the snaps. So we have to just kind of react to what they're doing. Hopefully we can react fast enough. So our matchup against Burn is generally favored, and that's on the back of the 4 God Pharaoh's Faithfuls in the main. If you can land that early and keep it alive, you're basically not going to lose. All of their stuff is going to be, all their bolts are going to turn into shocks, and you might be able to even get out of range of them if you have 2 God Pharaoh's Faithfuls and you start cantripping around. So that's basically our plan. Land a Faithful and protect the Queen. I actually like 4 snaps here because if they land a Thermo, you're likely to die on their next turn. They usually don't play it unless they're going to win. So you want to use your snaps aggressively to get rid of the Thermo Alchemists. Post board, in this setup, I'm definitely going to bring in my 4 Blue Elemental Blasts. And I would take out a Sage Row and 3 Deep Analysis at minimum. I would probably also bring in the 3 Negates over the 2 Prohibits and the Counterspell. I think that the Counterspell is probably too slow because it's 2 mana. 2 blue mana, I mean. And the Prohibits I like originally to counter their Thermos, but Negate hits every single card that's not a creature in their deck, and they obviously have a lot more of those. So post board we have 4 Blue Elemental Blast to deal with Thermos on the stack, and 4 Snaps to deal with it on the board. And I think that would work out pretty well. Sometimes I like to bring or put more life gain in my sideboard, but this deck is kind of pretty tight, so I didn't think I could fit it. So I just put in 4 blasts.
I usually like to keep it Prohibit against Burn. Mostly like because you said Thermal Alchemist. But maybe it might be correct to board them out. I also usually board out all 4 Deep Analysis and a couple Secret Oracles and a Sage's Row. And then I bring in the 3 Negates and 4 Blue Elemental Blast.
That makes sense.
That would be my plan.
My reasoning is that I don't So sometimes, like, you keep a hand with 3 blue elemental blasts, and then you play them 1, 2, 3 in a row, and then all you draw is lands, and you die. Like,
Yeah.
you can't not have card draw in your deck because it's so reliant on using it. So I don't like to go too far away from that. I would sometimes remove all 4 deep analysis and the Sage Row, and then bring in 5 counterspells, and then maybe swap some of the other ones so that you're up to like 8. But maybe it would be too many. I don't know, to go to like 9 or 10.
Yeah, I think once you hit 9 or 10 counters, you pretty much dilute your deck too much.
Yeah.
I have that problem sometimes.
It's possible also that in this deck you don't need Mnemonic Wall and Ephemerate. Ephemerate probably is still good so that you can save your Faithful or just get ahead with a Mold Drifter. But since you're not really reliant on the combo to win, you could just remove the Mnemonic Walls on the Deep Analysis and go hard on the counter spells and use some value creatures to just kind of grind them out. I have not tried that though.
I think if Mnemonic Wall was Arcanomancer, I would probably still keep it in, because, turn 2 Familiar, or like turn 1 Blue Mental Blast, turn 2 Familiar, turn 3 Arcanomancer, get back Blue Mental Blast is pretty good sequence.
Yeah.
Maybe, I think Mnemonic Wall is just too slow, so they can probably cut that too.
Kind of makes sense.
What are your thoughts on Nature's Chant against them, since they play like Curse the Pierce Heart?
I personally would not bring in Nature's Chant with 4 blue elemental blasts in the deck. Some people like to skim on the blasts. So if you only had like 2 blasts, you might want to bring in 1. They're definitely not going to cut their curses. So it's probably going to have a target if you end up drawing it. But also at the same time, it doesn't gain you life when played with a Faithful. So I'd never bring them in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it only hitting curse is not that great.
Yeah.
But like you said, if you cut down on Blue Mental Blasts or Negate, it's probably correct to bring 1 in.
Yeah, because you probably want 3 ways to get rid of a curse, at least. And nothing else in your deck does it.
Curse can be a problem for sure if you don't have a Faithful.
Yeah, or if they land multiples.
Yeah, that too. Once they slam down multiples, it's just game over.
Yeah, I think overall we're favored.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely one of our better matchups, especially with 4 Faithful and 4 Blue Mental Blasts.
Just don't let them have the nut draw.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, really.
It really is.
So, moving on, we're going to talk about Affinity. Affinity has been one of the worst matchups that I've run into and has caused me a lot of pain. Really I've been reworking my decks based on running into Tron and based on running into Affinity. Affinity is very fast, and they have a lot of aggro backed up by a combo, along with removal spells and counter spells. It's kind of like the perfect storm. So you basically are trying to, game 1, you just tempo them until you can get the infinite combo online and get a million life with Faithfuls, or mill them out. You can also get the infinite snap online, snap all their guys, and attack them. They're not going to be gaining a bunch of life, so that's a viable strategy. Post board with this list, we're definitely going to be bringing in 4 Stonehorn Dignitaries, and then some probably... I'm hesitant to bring in the Blue Blasts or the Negates. It's been something that's a bit of contention. Obviously, the Blue Blasts are really very good against ATOGs, but if you're dignitarying in them, if you're hitting them with the Stonehorn Dignitaries, we don't necessarily need the blasts to deal with the Togs. We need the blasts to deal with their interaction. So Negates would be better there. So I'm thinking I'm going to be bringing in 4 Stonehorn Dignitaries and 3 Negates. I'm going to take out the Sage Row, the Counterspell, 4 Deep Analysis, and like 1 Snap or 1 Faithful. Not really sure which is correct there. We have to just make sure that they don't kill us by turn 4. We land a Dignitary and we protect it. So we need a lot of interaction. Oh, I also would bring in 1 Chant.
Yeah, Chant is controversial, I think, because it does hit stuff like Mirror Enforcer, but hitting lands doesn't really do anything, or hitting like their prisms doesn't really do anything. But once you start looping, Nature's Chant, it's pretty out of hand for them.
Yeah, it's like it's win more in the situation. You aren't really gonna win because of it.
I think what I've been doing recently, or in this list, I would go cut all the Faithfuls, cut all Deep Analysis, add in 4 Stonehorns, 3 Negates, and probably a Remove Soul. Also, I can probably cut Counterspell for another Negate or Remove Soul, or Blue Elemental Blast. I think Deep Analysis is just too slow, and Faithful doesn't gain enough life. Like, it's just too slow, really. Because you can go turn 1 Faithful or turn 2 Faithful preordain, and you're not really going to gain that much life back from Faithful, and Faithful I think is mostly there for blocking, and it can't block anything. So a lot of the time it's just there to refill for life, but sometimes it just doesn't do that, and it's just too slow, or just doesn't block well enough. So I prefer Blue Elemental Blasts or Stonehorns there, for sure. I also forgot to mention cut Sage's Row. It's pretty much dead here. So maybe bring in 2 to 3 Blue Elemental Blasts.
Yeah, some Negates and some Blue Elemental Blasts would do you pretty well. In this matchup, they're obviously not gaining any life, so all you have to do is lock the combat step and attack them 4 or 5 times with some Old Drifters. And really, so the reason I usually bring in a Nature's Chant is because you can get infinite spells and then just kill everything. It's just something that's slow to do on Magic Online. As you can tell, it's a matchup that's pretty difficult to handle. Post board, they end up having Blue Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, Dispel, Fling, Atog. They got all these 4/4s that you have to deal with. It's quite a beating. It's difficult to
see. I think our entire sideboard is good against them, but their entire sideboard is better against us. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's just a rough battle. It really is.
So in previous lists, before I started using the bounce lands and the Ephemerate and the wall, I was using a mountain and 3 Gorilla Shaman in the sideboard. And it sort of serves the same purpose as a Stonehorn Dignitary in that it's like a many for one, because if you can use the Gorilla Shaman to early kill 3 or 4 lands, that like if you drop it on turn 4 and you kill 3 of their lands, it just puts them so far behind they generally can't win. But again, if they drop 2 or 3 4/4s by the time you're setting up your Gorilla Shaman, it's not going to help very much. So it's possible that the Stonehorn Dignitary plan is a better plan.
I think the person that started doing that was Glendalock. He was probably the one that started doing the Mountain plus Gorilla Shaman, and he had a lot of success against Affinity with that. But Affinity also plays Darksteel Citadel, which has indestructible, so you can't Gorilla Shaman it. And sometimes if they just have like 3 Citadel plus, let's say Prophetic Prism, it can be a problem.
Yeah, it'll put you way behind.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me a couple times. It definitely feels bad when that happens. And sometimes you just don't draw your mountain at all. So that does happen sometimes.
Yeah, in that list I had 7 cantrips, 6 to 7 cantrips, and 6 fetches to get the mountain. So I felt pretty confident I would get it. Because you really don't want to drop that guy on turn 1. It's just going to die. They're going to play around it. But it feels good to eat all their lands and kind of put them on the back burner.
It does slow them down a lot.
It's also good against the Jeskai Human's Affinity of 1 Mind deck if that comes up. So it's just, I think that Stonehorn Dignitary, obviously, I think it's the best anti-combat that you can possibly have. And since we have the walls with the flickers and ephemerates, it makes a lot of sense.
I think just like all of our answers are not like complete answers to everything that they do, because they have like 3 different lines of attack, like you said earlier. So you blocking them out with Stonehorn might be good enough for a while, but if you don't have a counterspell, they can always ATOG plus fling you. So in that case, you need to have another backup to beat that, and it's just rough.
And that makes me think that I want the deep analysis in the deck to keep drilling through and getting enough cards to be able to have more answers.
Maybe, but I think by the time you're just paying 4 mana to draw 2, you're probably losing. That's my thinking against that.
You have to best case scenario it or you're going to lose, because regular case scenario you're going to lose anyway. Well, it's a hard matchup. I would say we're not favored. Alright, so the deck that's the same meta percentage share in the last 2 weeks as Affinity is Boros Monarch. And that deck is looking to beat you down with their 2/2 or 2/3 flyers while gaining advantage by looping their prophetic prisms. So the game plan there is to play an early Faithful and not let their 1-2 onesie twosies 2/2s attack you in the air and kill you, and while also trying to counter their birds if possible, because that's their value engine. We're generally faster at drawing cards than they are, so you can usually win game 1 by valuing until you find the combo. You just have to kind of like play around the 1 or 2 open mana they have and make sure you don't get got by a rogue blast or something. So it's been pretty good pre-board. Post-board, they usually have quite a few Pyroblasts, and they also have 8 Lightning Bolts or Galvanic Blasts, so it's a big pain for you. You want to bring in this matchup, your 1 Exclude, I would think, your 3 Negates and a Nature's Chant. Let's see. So we would probably want to remove a Seagate Oracle, 2 Snaps. Let's say probably 2 Seagate Oracles and 2 Snaps. So you're just trying to stop them from getting the advantage and making their birds count. The Seagate Oracle can't block them anyway, and it's more important to have a lot of card draw with the deep analysis than it is to have an early play with the Seagate Oracle, I think. In this matchup, I kind of like try to play the control deck and make sure they're not doing what they want to do, and then combo them out late game. I don't think the Stonehorn Dignitary is necessary. I think if they get ahead enough where it matters, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, I think Stonehorn is just too slow. Or not slow, they're too slow for Stonehorn to be really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, it can stop them, but it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
Like, if you get 2 Faithfuls out, it's going to do just as much to stop their aggro from mattering.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, against this deck, the games are very involved and can go really long, so you have to play as fast as you possibly can. Very much be aware of the clock. And let's say you win game 1. What I normally do is, if I have to mulligan, or if I'm behind in game 2, I will concede very, very early. There's no sense in playing out an 8-minute game just to lose, because you need to have as much time as possible on the clock to win game 3, and you're much more favored to win the game if you're on the play.
Yeah, this is one of the matchups where you bashing in with Muldrifter is not that great, so you either have to combo with Sage's Denizen or snap their board, which is very, very time consuming. So you really do have to be careful about a clock.
I almost always will just keep the Sage Row in and go for the combo. I have one on the back of Beatdown before, but it's, I would say, like 1 in 100. And then the other 1 in 100 that does happen is sometimes you just don't ever do anything and gain 1,000,000 life and let them die to their Palace Sentinels, which is always fun.
I think here I would probably bring in Negates, Exclude, Remove Soul, and I wouldn't bring in Nature's Chant. The reason for that is, although it does hit Journey and Oblivion Ring, which are 2 really good targets, Prohibit and Negate already take care of those, and you don't really care about their eggs at all. Since, although they are their value train, you 1-for-1ing their Prophetic Prisms and such is not that great, since there will already be a hit from that.
Yeah.
And I usually do cut out a couple of snaps and 1 to 2 deep analysis as well.
Mm-hmm. It depends if you're on... I would say, like, if you're on the draw, you could cut a deep analysis, and if you're on the play, maybe cut a Seagate Oracle.
Yeah.
Because the deep analysis... Like, their game plan to beat you is to attack as much as possible. So they're going to be, like, playing a Glinhog on turn 1 and picking up their land. You kind of have to figure out what their plan is. If they're going to be doing something like that, snaps are good. But if they're going to be trying to value you out, you could keep the deep analysis. So, some number of snaps, some number of deep analysis, some number of Seagate Oracles, And then I usually bring in the 3 negates and exclude, and then sometimes the chance.
Yeah. I usually cut 2 snap always, because you snapping their fissures is not a good spot at all. But, snapping a creature for Monarch is also pretty good. So, or snapping a creature for removal.
Yeah, and you have to think about, like, evoke Muldrifter. That's always great. So removing that from the deck kind of gets rid of some of the engine.
I think Faithful is just the best card here, because if you resolve 2, you practically win the game. Because they can't burn your face at all, and their Glenhawk beats don't really do anything, because you're just getting like 4 to 6 life a turn, so it doesn't really matter against them at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Alright, so in a similar vein, another deck here is Boros Bully, and this deck is same colors but a slightly different strategy. Their plan here is to go wide with Squadron Hawks and Battle Screeches, and then attack you with 4 to 5 guys in the air, and hit with a Rally the Peasants, usually on turn 6, and then hit you for 20 plus damage. So they'll be beating down with those and with Secret of the Ways, and you just kind of have to like keep them off of their game. So game 1, you'll use snaps pretty aggressively to get rid of their bird tokens or their Secret of the Way, and hold up prohibits and counterspell if they have not played a Squadron Hawk yet, because if you can stop that Hawk train, it matters a lot. And then this is again another matchup where it goes to time a lot, so you have to be playing really fast and trying to be efficient with your actions. Essentially the game plan is the same as Boros Monarch. You land some Faithfuls and you get out of range of their attacks with life gain and keep them off their toes, and then combo them out. Post board here, my plan is different. I usually take out 2 Deep Analysis and a Seagate Oracle, and I'm going to be bringing in 3 negates in this specific instance. Maybe a snap as well for a Nature's Chant or something. But you basically are trying to get rid of your top end cards because they're trying to kill you by turn 6. So you can't afford to wait around and play Deep Analysis. That's just basically what I'm trying to do. It took me a while to figure that out.
Here I will usually get rid of all the Deep Analysis, because although drawing cards is really good against them, they do put a pretty heavy clock on you, where Deep Analysis is, where it's either too slow or the flashback is really bad by the time you use it. And I always bring in the 4 Stonehorn, because you always want to lock them out of the game, because they don't really have any interaction for that, except for blasts. And they don't need to have multiple of those to interact with. I also bring in 3 negates, and cut down Counterspell, a Seagate, and another Seagate, or a Snap, something like that. It really depends if you're on the player draw.
That makes sense too. I like to focus on like sort of tempoing them out and then winning with the combo. But I know you could also focus on just locking them out and then winning the long game too.
I go more for the long game and then eventually get the combo and win.
That's me probably being reliant on the old decks that didn't have Ephemerate.
I also do play a 4 Ephemerate version, so that's me. I'm used to that. But I think the big problem with Boros Bully is that they play at least 4 Rebs or Pyroblasts. So some of them play 6. So they can counter your flickers and all of your interaction all day. And sometimes you just can't do anything against them. And they just tempo you out.
So I would maybe cut some number of Deep Analysis and Snaps and bring in 3 negates and 2 Blue Blasts, because the another thing that they always bring in recently is Molten Rain, and Molten Rain on a Chancery is going to probably ruin your day. I'm always aware of that Molten Rain now after getting hit.
Yeah, I don't know why they started playing Molten Rain. I guess to make their Tron matchup just a little bit better, even though it's still pretty bad.
Yeah, I guess if they can go with a Molten Rain on the play, they can stop Tron from getting there, and then they can pyro the next thing, and then they can win on turn 5 or 6.
Yeah, I guess turn 2 Seeker into Molten Rain's pretty good against them. Although I think just turn 2 Seeker is good in general, but that's me.
So the next deck we're going to talk about is Mono Black Control, which is essentially a deck that tries to use a few value creatures and some 1-for-1s to keep creatures off the board and then eventually win through attrition. Luckily, in our case, we have a lot of card draw, so we generally can just win because we have more threats than they have answers, or more cards than they have answers, I would say. So game 1 is just basically try to outvalue them, gain some life, and don't lose to Thorn of the Black Rose or something. You want to play out your Faithfuls early so that if they play an Edict or something, you can just sack the Faithful. You also want to play out your Seagate Oracles, and you can run out your Sage Row into an Edict, no big deal, because they can easily be handled by just attacking with Muldrifters. Be aware that they have Jukabogs main, so play conservative sometimes if you like have all your familiars and you're like ready to go for it. But generally game 1 is kind of a landslide victory in our favor. And then post board, they're going to have sometimes land destruction, most of the time Okiba Gang Shinobis, most of the time Wrench Mind. So in this matchup, I would bring in all my negates and my exclude, potentially remove soul as well. I want to maybe be able to remove soul their turn 4 Thorn of the Black Rose, because usually they keep a hand based on that working for them. And if you stop that, they are just dead in the tracks. And when they're not drawing 2 cards a turn, they're going to run out of steam really fast. I would remove the Sage's Rodenizen and some number of snaps. The rest of it's pretty good. I also generally remove 1 or 2 Faithfuls if I'm on the play, and then on the draw maybe just 1, because they don't matter that much. They're just sacrifice fodder, really, because you're with 2 of them, you can still gain enough life to not really be that worried about a Gary. But you do have to have a blocker for an Okiba Gang, so it's something to be considered. 2-for-1 you post board, so just have to be aware of that.
Here I would probably bring in Exclude and Negate, like you said, and probably cut down a couple snaps, Sage's Row, and a Seagate, maybe a Mnemonic Wall. But I think my main game plan here is to slam down Faithfuls, and sometimes slam Familiars down, and try to make them use the removal until I can get down a Muldrifter plus Ephemerate, and then pretty much reverse what they did. Because they probably spent 3 to 4 removal spells killing all of our creatures, and then you just refill your hand again. That's usually my main game plan, because at that point they'll have 4 cards in hand and you'll have 8. So
sometimes I like to not just throw down the Muldrifter and Ephemerate if it's my only creature on the board, because it's pretty easy for them to get rid of it, and then you exile your Ephemerate and you're not super value. It's still good, but it's not great.
I also like to keep in Counterspell here, because you want to Ephemerate lock, and sometimes they'll get you down low enough to where you can die from Gary or Grey Merchant of Asphodel. So having Counterspell as your only answer there is pretty much needed. I think Mono Black Control is pretty much 90% of the time a win for us, because they are just 1-for-1ing us all day, and then we have so much value in card draw that, like I said earlier, we just reverse what they all did, and we can just win from a landslide, because they just don't do anything after they kill your first 4 creatures. They can sometimes steal games from Thorn of the Black Rose, because if you don't have a Muldrifter, or they just kill it, for example, they can refill their hand pretty easily.
No, that makes sense. Alright, so moving on to Stompy. Stompy has been pretty much the premier aggro deck in Pauper since Burning Tree Emissary was printed. And then they got another power-up with Savage Swipe. So it's definitely a player in the aggro game and something to be aware of. The way to play this matchup is to not play your Sunscape Familiar unless you have a way to deal with Savage Swipe. So, like, you could either just jam Godpharaoh's Faithful turn 1, make them swipe that, and then play Sunscape Familiar turn 2 and hope they don't have 2 in their hand, or play Familiar turn 3 and hold up Prohibit. A lot of times you can hold up Snap after playing your fam, but they, 90% of the time will have Savage Swipe plus Vines, so the Snap is a little bit less reliable than just countering the swipe. Game 1, you're trying to drop your Faithfuls and snap out all their creatures and just try to gain life out of range until you either combo kill them or attack with Mulldrifters. Usually when you have the Ephemerate lock, well, if you just keep like snapping all their guys and attacking with Mulldrifters, they see the writings on the wall and will concede. So you don't usually have to go all the way. Post board, we're definitely going to be bringing in 4 Stonehorn Dignitaries, and I don't think we really need much else here. Sometimes I would bring in a Nature's Chant, but I probably won't nowadays. You can just remove your Sage's Row Denizen and a Counterspell and 2 Deep Analysis. We still want some number of Counterspells, and we want some number of card draws, so maybe switch the Counterspell with a Negate just to handle the swipes, and then take out 3 Deep Analysis and Sage's Row Denizen. Because the game plan post board is to combat lock them and attack with Mulldrifters. It's relatively straightforward. You just have to play around them having swipes or vines. A lot of times their game plan is to dump their hand, so you kind of have to just survive the early game, and then they'll have 1 card in hand, and you only have to play around 1 thing.
I think my plan here would bring in, like you said, 4 Stonehorn Dignitary, cut 4 Deep Analysis, because, like for Affinity, it's just too slow. They can kill you turn 4 sometimes. So if you're either on the play or draw, it's pretty weak if you don't get down to Familiar. So I'll usually cut all of those, bring in 2 Negates, cutting a Counterspell, and a Sage's Row, and that's usually my game plan there. The reason I don't bring in Exclude or Remove Soul is because it's not the creatures you care about, it's the spells that can make them bigger. That's what you care about. Because you can block their 2/2s all day, but, once they slap down a Rancor, your Faithful can't block it anymore, so.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, to coincide with Stompy, I think we should talk about the other aggro decks, Elves and Bogles. So Elves has more of a meta share on this sheet than Bogles does. My game plan against Elves is to try to combo as fast as possible, because that's essentially what they're trying to do too, especially game 1. And then game 2, so game 1, you're basically trying to snap all their Timber Watches and all of their Titania. You don't want them to be able to make a bunch of mana and dump all their creatures on the board. It's just not going to work out. And then as long as you can keep the Timber Watch off, you can't get killed that fast. Maybe they'll have a turn 5 or 6, and then hopefully by then you can just combo kill them. Post board, I will be bringing in the Stonehorn Dignitaries as a direct swap for the Godpharaoh's Faithful. And then I also will be bringing in Nature's Chant and Negates. And I'll probably take out the Counterspell, the Prohibit, or both of the Prohibits. And in this version, probably a Deep Analysis. So what I'm trying to do is just stop them from being able to cast Distant Melody and Viridian Longbow, and then snap anything that's going to kill me, and just land an early Sunscape Familiar and try to combo by turn 5 or 6. You can still Stonehorn lock them, which is good, but a lot of times post board they'll have something where a life drain effect, or something that can deal you all the damage based on the number of creatures they have. So Godpharaoh's Faithful can't gain you enough life to win the game. and you just kind of like need to fill that with cards that do a lot more.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Stonehorn here because it's forcing you to like not always have Snap to answer Timberwatch. I usually only bring in 3 though because they don't really put pressure on until turn 4 and 5, until they can get like Coin Ranger plus Timberwatch. Yeah, so I like to have 3, and 3 negate for sure because, like you said, Distant Melody and Lead to Stampede, those kinds of cards. Also Longbow, very good to answer those. Remove Soul and Exclude are just meh. Like, you only care about Timberwatch, but like I said before, Stonehorn is better against that than Remove Soul and Exclude. I usually don't like Deep Analysis, but I might keep it too sometimes. Because,
you basically just have to, you have to draw enough cards to not die, or to get your combo online. It took me a while to figure out that Godpharaoh's Faithful wasn't doing enough, but I think it's a good cut. They Timberwatch you for 60, and you're like, well, the 3 life didn't matter that much.
But yeah, Snap is an all-star there for sure. Also, I might cut Counterspell sometimes. Although it is like an all-in answer, or all-out answer, it is pretty risky with the double blue. And Negate is just better.
For sure, because you're going to be tapping out all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
The last 2 decks that we're going to talk about is Blue-Black Delver and regular Mono-Blue Delver. Both of these decks are aiming to beat you down and tempo you out, but they have slightly different strategies. Blue-Black Delver wants to land an early Delver and then counterspell you out, as well as using some effective removal spells, and then land an Angler, which is a 5/5 Delve creature, and they're going to keep attacking and kill you that way. Whereas Mono Blue Delver plays an early Delver and then tries to tempo you out by using Spellsetter Sprites or counterspells to make sure that you can't really enact your game plan. In both of these strategies, what we want to do is land an early Godpharaoh's Faithful to get out of range of the Delver attacks, and then effectively use your snaps when needed to get rid of the Delvers or other large threats. From the Mono Blue Delver side, it's not going to have large threats because the Delver is their main one, but in the Blue-Black Delver matchup, Snap is going to be very much your best friend. You get to get rid of a 7-mana creature, and even though it has Delve, it sets them really far back if you can bounce it. In these matchups, Deep Analysis is really important because both of these decks are using Mystic Sanctuary and Deprive to try to soft lock you out of the game. So we want to use those, and Sage Rose mill kill is not super important. In the Blue-Black Delver matchup, we also just want to make sure that we don't walk into any removal spells, and we don't play into a spot where Snuff Out can really take you too far behind. So you can Ephemerate a Muldrifter if you're willing to lose the Ephemerate to Snuff Out, or if you have a backup, basically is what you want to do. Whereas in the Mono Blue Delver matchup, you kind of have to play around all the sprites and stuff like that. Both these decks are actually sometimes playing Force Spike, so that's something to be aware of. Sometimes Blue-Black Delver plays Spell Pierce as well. I don't actually bring in Stonehorn Dignitaries for either of these decks. My game plan is pretty much the same. I'm going to be removing Sage's Row Denizen and then bringing in some counterspells. So against the Blue-Black Delver, post-board, they're going to be a bit slower generally. So I'll bring in the 3 negates, none of the other counterspells, and then I'll take out the Sage's Row Denizen, probably a Seed Oracle, and a Faithful, just to trim a bit. I'm going to win either of these matches by attacking. And then versus something like Mono Blue Delver, I could probably trim Seagate Oracle, Sage's Row Denizen, and Snap, and bring in the 3 negates. I don't think you need any ground block. Well, the Seagate Oracles that much, and the Snaps aren't going to be too necessary versus them. But the Godpharaoh's Faithfuls are very, very important in a matchup with ninjas.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with the sideboard plan. I usually will cut down one deep analysis because against me they always have 3 delvers. You know, if they have a couple delvers on the first 2 turns, your deep analysis is kind of garbage since you can't flash it back at all.
Yeah, so maybe that's another play draw decision.
Yeah, for sure.
Like on the draw, keep the snaps, lose the deep analysis, and on the play, you can maybe trim a snap.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you want to have more life gain over more card draw against them because their only actual threat that you can't really interact with is Delver. So if you have like 2 Faithfuls, it'll usually have Delvers covered. And same with Snap. So I usually like to keep the four of those. And trimming a Seagate makes sense. Trimming Sage's Row makes sense. And then you can usually go from there.
I don't like to go under 4 deep analysis because of the deprive lock and just being able to bust through that. It's kind of tough in this deck because, well, I guess Ephemerate can bust you out of the deprive lock too if you can land it correctly. But in the deck where it had like 4 Faithfuls and 3 Strands, you just had so much more to cut for interaction.
Yeah. I've also been seeing some lists play Thorn of the Black Rose, so you really want Muldrifter and Ephemerate there too.
I think both of these decks are kind of like doing the same thing, and you just have to play around what their other interaction is. Mortuary Mires are good, and then remember, like in these matchups, because you have Mortuary Mire to rebuy your creatures, you can block and kill a Delver with your Muldrifter. It doesn't matter. You're trying to win the long game. And you can also, like in the blue Delver matchup, if they're holding up all of their sprites, just attack into them and let your Muldrifter die. One thing to note is that in the mono blue Delver matchup, if they do have the Spire Golems, you probably want to bring in a Nature's Chant too, because you can kill them, and snapping them every turn is really time inefficient. So it's dependent on how much time you have left on the clock, whether or not you want to bring in the Nature's Chant.
Yeah, I think it really does depend on the clock. I think Chant is just like for Curse against Burn, for example, or Curse in Burn, It only has one target. So
maybe if you see the Spire Golems and a couple relics,
yeah, then it makes sense.
Then go for
it. So if you guys want to see another one of these Blue-Eye Familiars episodes where we talk about more of how to sideboard against other meta decks, please let us know. Next week we'll be having our first actual guest on the podcast, and he'll be talking about his version of Familiars, Rainbow Familiars. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. We will be seeing you guys next Saturday. Have a good one. Peace.